Hey, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co host Keith Myers here for a live stream show, talking free agency, roster building strategy, NFL draft, prospect, reshaping of the roster, all that good stuff. I want to say right off the bat, we were originally scheduled to have Dan Viennes of the Field Goals podcast and Seahawks Forever on Twitter here as a guest, and he had some last minute rescheduling stuff and could not make it into the show, so Keith and I will carry on as always anyway.
And
So
we will get Dan on the show as soon as we can.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he'll be back for sure. So welcome in. Big day so far. Kind of a little bit of unexpected spending right at the top for Seattle on the first day of the legal tampering period, Monday, in free agency. Today is Tuesday, obviously, and contracts can start to be signed on Wednesday. There's already been quite a bit of movement with Seattle, including their first signing in the tampering period, if you will, of Dermont Jones, the defensive tackle from Denver. It's a 3-year deal, but it's a first-year $10.1 million cap hit in 2023, which is definitely favorable for Seattle, allowing them to make a whole bunch of other moves as well. And in fact, right before we pushed record, Seattle announced that they're also bringing back defensive tackle Jerron Reed on a 2-year deal, close to a $10 million total value. So
Yeah,
lots of movement.
That's a good deal. John Reed was never really replaced as an interior pass rusher, a guy that could get upfield and get pressure on a quarterback from the 3-tech spot. They've kind of been looking for his replacement. Now they don't have to. Now they just have him. And then so that I like that. Plus the contract level is nice. I mean, 2 years at just under 10, so it's about $5 million per year. He was making over 10 when they let him go. Now they bring him back for half that, so that's a good fit for them. And Jones, can't say enough about that guy. He was not anyone you and I talked about, in part because I didn't think there was any chance that they were going to get him. He was just going to cost way too much. 26-year-old elite interior lineman, gets upfield as good as anybody in the NFL, lives in the backfield, and a guy that Seahawks fans, you're going to love him. You are going to love him. He is a guy that's going to live in the backfield, mess up running plays, get to quarterbacks. That made the defense better instantly.
Yeah, definitely. And this is one of the things that you want to do in free agency, that you want to set up your team as best as you can as you approach the draft. As we all know, Seattle has 10 picks in the draft, including the 5th overall pick. There's been a lot of speculation there about who that might be, as far as will it be one of the top defensive picks in the draft, either Anderson or Carter. We know that Carter has had some legal issues come up, and we just don't know what that entails. So this is kind of a hedge on that. Dermont Jones and Carter play the same position in the NFL, and Jones has proven that he does it. It's a great signing for me for Seattle, especially the $10 million cap hit right off the bat. Solidifies that that defense. They moved on from Shelby Harris. He was cut as well, and don't know for sure what the status would be on Poona Ford. And then Al Woods is in there for one more season as well. So they're definitely remaking the defensive line, Keith.
Which we knew they were going to do. The defensive line was the weakest part of Seattle's team, the roster, just in general. And having them, they've upgraded at 2 of the 3 positions. They still need a nose tackle. I mean, you've got Al Woods and you've got Brian Monet at that position, 2 big guys, neither of which is, going to move the needle in terms of impact. Al Woods is, great veteran player, but isn't a star. And Brian Monet is kind of a serviceable young guy that happens to be massive. I'd like to still see them draft a guy for that spot, a Mozzie Smith type, someone that can be a difference maker on the line.
Sure.
And honestly, look what San Francisco has done, right? They already had Bosa, and they've added, was it Hargrave, to, Armstead's still there. That defensive line is
Oh, that's
now,
brutal.
it was already brutal, and then they added a fantastic defensive tackle into the middle of it. That team is going to be rough to play against.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, for sure. The other guy I wanted to mention too signed his exclusive rights free agent deal, and Miles Adams, their defensive lineman as well. Similar skill set as the two we just signed. That'll be really interesting. I do need the Seahawks to address that Al Woods spot, though. Now, Al Woods is coming back, and he's a fine player, but he's not the complete answer at defensive tackle at the nose position. We all know that. You mentioned Mozzie Smith in the draft. That would be ideal if he was to come on this roster, even with the existing players they've just signed, plus a couple of peripheral players, maybe an additional player out of the draft or some undrafted rookie free agents. That group alone right now, as it stands, is better than it was last year, and I think that's was needed for sure. Seattle was close to the bottom 5 in the NFL as far as stopping the run. I think that's going to be an emphasis from Pete Carroll this season, and this is a good start.
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, they still got those 5 draft picks in the top 85, and so they're going to be able to add to this. One other thing that happened with all of this is that Cody Barton left, signed a fully guaranteed 1-year contract, and is now gone. Seattle now has 0 healthy inside linebackers, which is an issue.
And did you see how fast all the inside linebackers or linebackers in general in the free agency flew off the boards? It was just kind of crazy. It's like the most important position, according to what teams decided to spend their money on first out of the gate in free agency. I was just amazed at all the linebackers just went off. Bobby Wagner's still sitting out there, and maybe that's what they're thinking. And
comes down to cost.
It does come down to cost. Yes, absolutely. But it also comes down to need. And Seattle's in a big need situation, and probably played right into what Bobby Wagner was hoping for. If he is, in fact, on his way back here, we don't know that for sure. But as it stands right now, I would bet 50-50 money on that, because Seattle, like you said, doesn't have anybody right now really at all. Unless you count John Radigan, who they brought back on an exclusive rights deal.
Or as one of our listeners just said, Nick Bellore, he's still on the roster. No.
I guess we should. I mean, since this is a free agency show, I guess we should acknowledge everyone that did re-sign. So we did bring back Nick Bellore. We signed Myers, the kicker, to a new deal.
Wait, you
who
signed
else?
me to a new deal?
Yeah.
I don't remember getting a new deal. What's up with
funny.
that?
But they did sign Nick Bellore. They brought back Phil Haynes. Obviously, Geno Smith was the tip of the spear as far as free agents that Seattle needed to bring back and sign. They elected to move on, though, from Shelby Harris, and we kind of predicted that. We thought that there was a chance that there might be a restructure. Now there's a chance that they could bring him back and sign him for a lower cost deal. We'll just have to wait and see. He's probably going to get a little bit of a look out there. There might be a little bit of a market for him.
Yep.
Who else, Keith?
So let's see. Ryan Neal has signed his restricted free agent tender, so they can still negotiate with him on a longer term
they did
deal,
not sign him to a second round tender.
They did not.
No, they just signed him to a original round tender, which puts him at about a $1.7 million lower cap hit than the exclusive rights or the second round tender. And which means that other teams could present an offer sheet. If Seattle doesn't elect to match, Seattle does not get compensated.
But
they
have a right of first refusal.
Correct.
With that, let's see. You mentioned John Radigan, Michael
Quentin
Jackson.
Jefferson. Quentin Jefferson was cut too, by the way.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. He is not a scheme fit for what Seattle wants to do. It was good to have him back. He's kind of a fun story as a guy who started here and then left and then came back. But
and Gabe Jackson was gone. So both those
Yep.
guys, represented about $13 million worth of cap. And
Yep.
Shelby Harris was $9 million. So all things being equal, we have about $10 million of functional cap space right now. And that was prior to the Jaron Reed signing. So
it's about $5 million in functional
depending
cap
on
space.
how that deal's structured.
Yeah.
That deal could be, a $2-3 million initial cap hit. We'll have to see how that thing's.
Yep. The only other thing that I'm looking at is Michael Jackson, the cornerback. It was an exclusive right free agent, has re-signed. He was the starting cornerback for all of last year, opposite the super stud rookie, and came back for under $1 million. It's exclusive rights. They don't really have. There's not a lot of negotiation happening there. You either sign it or you don't play in the NFL. And so he'll be back for another year.
Yeah, which is great news. Really,
there's a ton of guys though that are still unsigned and just out there that were on Seattle's team last year that you're kind of looking at going, I wonder how many of these guys are going to come back.
Well, I want to say Rashad Penny was just signed by the Philadelphia Eagles.
That's true.
So he's not going to be coming back. Now we're really
surprise.
short. Yeah, that was a little bit of a surprise, but good for him. When healthy, he could be a top back. That's always going to be an asterisk for him unless he proves otherwise. But right now, I think, you and I had talked previously about Seattle using that as just kind of a hedge, maybe in the draft. We'd still go out and probably sign somebody, but we need somebody opposite of Ken Walker to be able to carry that load. Homer's a free agent as well. Now you're looking at just Dallas and Ken Walker in the backfield signed for 2023. And so there's going to be some movement there. We talked about Austin Blythe at the center. He decided to retire. Now that is a big void as well. Poona Ford. Don't know if Poona Ford was originally going to come back or not. Pete Carroll alluded to the idea that he was out of place last year. And I still don't think that he's a great fit in our current scheme. And obviously they decided to go in a different direction with the two signings they did make.
Yeah. I was just looking through the list. Travis Homer is only 25. Feels like he's been in Seattle forever. But he's only 25. I wouldn't be surprised to see him come back to give them another familiar name, guy they know and trust at running back. But man, they need another body at running back.
Or two. They need two, really.
So
and I expect them to draft a guy, and of course, rookie free agents, they'll probably bring in a decent look at a veteran to come in and just kind of take some snaps as well, if not only for training camp. I was trying to find the running back list. So guy like David Montgomery's out there. That would be a great fit for Seattle as a guy that can kind of take it through the in between the tackles. Kareem Hunt. That's about it. I mean, everyone else kind of scooped up yet. There's some underlying names. Miles Sanders, of course, the guy that Penny was signed to replace in Philadelphia. Jamal Williams hasn't been re-signed yet.
Yeah, Ronald Jones is a possibility. God, there's a lot of guys that just aren't between the tackles runners, though. And somehow Kenyon Drake is still in the NFL. That's interesting. Devin Singletary maybe is a guy to look at. It's not a great. I mean, running back's never a great thing to need as far as when it comes to running backs, because if they're on the market, they're either at that point where they're just disappearing as far as talent because it's such a short-lived position, or they are, just they're not that good. You know, a lot of the ones that make it to free agency that still have talent aren't between the tackles guys. They're guys that are the change of pace guy. They're the receive the ball out of the backfield guy, and that's just not what Seattle is needing.
Yeah, interesting. And we've just got a bunch of replacement level players that are current free agents that were on the roster last year that need to kind of come back or re-sign officially. I'm talking about guys like Drew Lock, backup quarterback on the roster. It'll be interesting for me to sort of mark it out there. He's a young guy, big arm, never really had a chance, didn't have a chance at Seattle to show what he had because, of course, Geno Smith stepped up in a big way and played every snap that the Seahawks had in 2022. So that's an interesting name for me to see if anybody is interested in him. LJ Collier, don't think that he's going to be back. I think he just ran out of opportunities here in Seattle, only played 12% of the snaps last year. Artie Burns at corner, I think we can do better there. He didn't see any snaps in Seattle's defense. Marquise Goodwin, third wide receiver, still out there on the market. He would be a value sign. I think Seattle goes, a few weeks into free agency before they address that type of a situation.
What about the fact that both of the team's long snappers are unsigned? Both
We need to pick one.
Carson Tinker and Tyler Ott. Tyler
Just
Ott's
sign him
31.
up for
Carson Tinker is 34. So
yeah,
take your pick.
Yeah, do some sort of a challenge outside of football to see who gets that spot. I would imagine. I mean, there was nothing wrong with Tyler Ott before he got injured. It really just depends on which contract I think looks better to Seattle.
Yeah.
At this point, I don't know who got along better with everyone on the roster. I don't know. I was trying to see here. Tanner Muse, there might be some interest in bringing Tanner Muse back now that Cody Barton's off the roster. Penny Hart, we're talking, just a roster invite to camp at that point. Tony Jones, running back, just really just not a lot there. I think they've maybe, like you said, Travis Homer, everyone else is kind of, but they do need to put a roster together, and a lot of these familiar names will probably be back. I would say, at least 10 of the 20 remaining free agents that are around Seattle's roster last year will probably come back, at least be invited into camp. They've got 10 picks in the draft.
An eye on would be Jonathan Abram, guy who was started and played quite a bit at strong safety, even though he wasn't even on the roster at the beginning. But when Ryan Neal was hurt, and of course Adams was hurt in the beginning of the first game, Abram gave him a lot of play and ended up surprisingly playing 52% of the snaps last year.
Yeah, there really hasn't been a run yet on safeties in the free agency market, and that surprises me a little bit because the draft class is weak. You take a look at the athleticism, the testing numbers, some of the film out of the safety class, and there's just not a lot to work with after the first 5 or 6 players taken off the board. And there is quite a nice list of safeties out there available. I'm glad that we at least tendered Ryan. It'll be very interesting to me to see if another team jumps on that. And at least, I mean, you could front load a deal with a team with some salary cap and
just make it impossible.
Big salary paid out in 2023, sign him to a deal. Seattle couldn't match that. The team that signs him then could convert that to bonus money after the contract sign, and Seattle wouldn't be able to do anything about it.
No, actually,
it's a little bit of a risky move, isn't it?
You can't do that. You cannot make alterations to a new contract prior to the rule just changed. I think it's like the first week of November.
Interesting. Okay.
So mid-season, because otherwise that kind of, it's part of the poison, like they've gone out of their way to remove like poison pill type issues.
Okay. So now that we've done a few things, obviously we're recording now. They'll probably break some other major news while we're sitting here,
That's what
which
happens.
always seems to happen with us.
Yep.
But so share with me, if you can, just kind of an overarching idea of, based on initial moves that Seattle's made, starting with Geno Smith and our new defensive line additions. What does it tell you about the commitment to winning now versus rebuilding, as well as the type of players that Seattle's looking at and the commitment they are making to the defensive line?
Well, it seems to me when I look at this that they're committing to rebuilding the defense, and they're doing it in a way that makes sense, and that you start up front, right? You've got to start at you start in the trenches. Games are won and lost there. There may not be sexy picks, but that's still where you win and lose games. And going after a guy like Drummond Jones and signing him to a really big contract is huge, because he is such a disruptive force. But they went through, and I mean, him, and they re-signed Phil Haynes and got him back. They've Geno, they brought Michael Jackson back to be a cornerback. Basically, they're looking at, we're going to win now, but we're not going to do what the Rams did a couple years ago, and that is sell everything, and just, we're going to go all in and know that it's going to kill us in the future, but save everything to try and win a title right now. They're trying to win, but they're doing so in a way that's going to allow them to do well both now and later.
Yeah, and speaking of later, we've got that draft, and part of that compensation coming back from the Russell Wilson deal. We've got a first-round pick and a second-round pick in addition to our own native picks. You mentioned it earlier, 5 picks in the top 85, with a chance, by moving down a couple spots with either one of those, to pick up additional ammunition. They have to be careful. They've got 10 picks. You don't want to have too many picks coming in, or you're not going to make the roster, or it would be difficult, plus the cap implications as well. So they may look for additional ammunition in the 2024 draft as well. Yeah, interesting. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about that we haven't had a chance to talk about on the show yet. I wanted to kind of get your feedback on. They announced today that Roy Anderson was that secondary coach hired into the team that was to replace Sean Desai. He's been around the league a little bit, defensive analyst for LSU Tigers. He was previously just with Minnesota up until through the 2021 season. Lots of experience. This will be his 17th year on an NFL roster as a coach. Just thought I'd mention that. And then I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a coach that nobody's really talked about yet, and it's a position that didn't exist prior to him being on the team, which is the Seahawks pass rush specialist, Brandon Jordan. Brandon Jordan most recently was a hire for the Michigan State football team. And he was discovered essentially on YouTube originally, and I can't remember the name of the player. Anyway, pretty prominent pass rush guy in the NFL. Found him. He has then since worked with Von Miller, Jadeveon Clowney, Cameron Hayward, Chandler Jones, TJ Watt. He's been most recently training Will McDonald out of USC for the NFL draft. His teams brought him in. He's trained Leonard Floyd and others. What are they doing with this? This is a kind of a new hire, new position. What's going on?
Well, you look at this team, and they know they need to get more out of their pass rushers. And you and I talked about it last year. Like, we thought going into the year that they were going to have a real nice pass rush between Daryl Taylor and Boye Mafe, and then you've got Uchenna Nwasu on the other side. They knew they were going to need some disruption up the middle, but you had Quentin
Jamal Adams
Jefferson
was healthy initially.
and Shelby Harris, which are two guys that are known for getting up the field, and they just weren't getting as much out of their pass rushers as it seemed like they should. So they were like, okay, well, what are we doing wrong? And so they went out and found someone who that's what their specialty is. They're a guy that has coached individual players and has worked with guys and helped develop individuals into being really fantastic players and pass rushers, and said, okay, we're going to bring this guy in and he's going to work with our pass rushers and he's going to help us be more productive so that our pass rush win rates are higher, our pressure rates are higher, our sack rates are higher. And they know they needed help. And what they were doing, what they've been teaching, it just hasn't been translating on the field. So they're like, okay, let's go find a new guy. That's new ideas. And yeah, like you said, a guy that how long ago was he was nothing more than a a YouTube guy
Yeah,
that talked about things
as short as 2020. He was just out there
yeah
kind of doing this on his own. He started his own, if well, and I guess his teaching methods are unorthodox, but not completely out of the box. It just makes more sense to a lot of the guys. It translates, those drills that he has them running translate more to on field production, and
yeah
developed quite a little reputation for himself. So much so that he was hired into Michigan State, and after 1 year at Michigan State, he was hired into the NFL. I mean, talk about a rising star. That's kind of crazy.
He's just a really good teacher is basically what it comes out to be, is that um he's not revolutionizing the position or what people do. He's not teaching them things that nobody else does. He's just he's a really good teacher and really good at taking basics and putting them in drills in a way that they actually show up on the field when you start watching tape. It's really similar to what we saw from Chris Richard when he first came to Seattle as secondary coach. First as a assistant secondary coach, and then secondary coach. Just a really good teacher of things, and it shows up on the field, and a lot of people make improvements. So you got a guy that's really good at teaching, and that's what Seattle's looking for. They've got athletes, they've got guys, but they need to get more out of them. What do? You bring in someone who's good at teaching.
Absolutely. So I want to mention a couple of the different things in the rumor mill. I've heard through Bob Condata that the team is purportedly working on a multi-year deal for Ryan Neal, and that's where they're at with that. They'd like to get him signed. Reportedly, quote unquote, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And then also from Bob Condata saying that the Cowboys, which are one of the teams associated with bringing Bobby Wagner in, potentially have bowed out of that just because they've spent too much money in free agency and can no longer afford him. So there's that. But interesting.
There's an interesting rumor that I think maybe we should discuss, that at one point Seattle was in talks with the Jets about trading the 5th overall pick for Sauce Gardner to be the guy opposite. My brain just blanked. Their all-world cornerback that they drafted last year in the 5th round.
Tariq Woolen.
And Woolen, there we go. God, why am I having issues here? But that you're looking at that, and that Pete Carroll eventually came in and nixed it. I don't know how true that is. I mean, it's bouncing around Twitter, and a couple of national guys picked up on it, but I think their sources were also Twitter. So I don't know if that's true or not. It was interesting to think about the idea that
I've not heard
maybe
that.
John
that would
Snyder
be
was
interesting.
looking at the possibility of acquiring another cornerback. And I think it's probably not all that true, and it's probably just one of those things that bounced around and long enough until someone nationally who is looking for something to write about picked up on it. But if there is any smoke behind that, um, then maybe cornerback is a bigger need, not maybe need, but a bigger priority to John Snyder than we think. And maybe it's something that we need to think about as far as draft, is that they might be in
I
for a cornerback earlier than what you and I were thinking.
Yeah, I've thought about that, and of course, when you run the mocks and you're looking for value, sometimes the top of the board doesn't go the way you want it to, and you're looking to drop back. And if you can't drop back, well, sometimes you take a look at Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon, the 6'2",
Mhm.
205-pound cornerback, super athletic, plays the ball really well, best cornerback in the draft. And do you use the fifth pick if you can't get out of it, and nobody's sitting there that you really think is a value? Do you go for positional value there at cornerback
Best
and pick
player
that thing,
available.
best player available? And sometimes there are situations where I press that draft select button with him, and he ends up there at 5 or a short drop back. Um,
Mhm.
it seems unlikely. I think that they would prefer him over a guy like Devin Witherspoon. I think Devin Witherspoon is really physical, and he's a good corner, but he doesn't meet the measurables. I don't know if that means anything at the top of the draft that Seattle likes. Joey Porter Jr. out of
Mhm.
Penn State is another player that I really like. Yeah, Ringo is another guy, but I think he's going to be available a little later, just because he's got some coverage liabilities. He's a very super athletic guy, but he hasn't put it all together yet.
Mhm.
And Brian Branch would be another guy, kind of a safety slot cover corner. So scheme diverse. I think Seattle would like that. I think he's a great player, good leadership ability, all that kind of stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me. I don't know that it's likely. Obviously, you've got a track record of 10 plus years with John Schneider and Pete Carroll not drafting corners early. But if you've done a really good job in free agency and your roster is pretty well looking set, except for a couple of spots, corners one of them, as you head into the draft, anything's possible. You're on mute, Keith.
Of course I am, because it wouldn't be um, it wouldn't be a show if I wasn't on mute at one point when I'm trying to talk. So if we're looking at all of this, free agency has just gone crazy. Have there been any contracts so far that you're just like, wow, I did not see that coming?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you can take a look at some of the franchise tag things like Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley, and Tony Pollard in the running back group. It's not very often you see running backs tagged, because that franchise tag is $10 million, $10+ million. So those things kind of hit you. Um, I'm surprised that Lamar Jackson is franchised, but he also tweeted today that he has been reportedly offered a deal where he's got $200 million fully guaranteed in a deal in just a 3-year deal, which
Mhm.
would be crazy money. I mean, $65-70 million a year, if that would be true.
I was saying
Um,
I would have already signed that. Uh,
I know, right? The big deals. Let me look around just for a second here. Yeah, the Mike McGlinchey Denver Broncos deal, the right tackle out of from the 49ers, signed a $87.5 million 5-year deal to
yeah.
be the Denver Broncos tackle. Um, Juwan Taylor also signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, 4 years, 80 million. I mean, holy cow, right? Let me
Mhm.
see. Oh, Ethan Posick signed a 3-year deal for 18 million, which he was apparently one of the um, premier centers available in free agency, believe it or not. Garrett Bradbury, that we often thought would be possibly available out there for Seattle, as we need a center, re-signed with the Minnesota Vikings, 3 years, 15 million.
Mhm.
Let me see if there's how about that Hargrave signing with the 49ers, 4 years, $80 million, Keith. Is that
God.
worth it? And what does
Um,
it do for them? I mean, you'd mentioned it earlier when you got Armstead there and Bosa and now Hargrave. I mean, what do you do against that line?
I mean, for them, I wonder about diminishing returns because you've already got so much talent on that line. Their line was not a weakness; it was already a massive strength. And okay, you're building on that strength, but where they need help defensively is on the back end. They need safeties, they need corners, and spending $20 million or $21 million a year on a 30-year-old defensive lineman. I don't know if that was the best move for them. So that one was definitely
I'll tell
a
you the
little bit
most
confusing.
outrageous contract for me, and a super good player. It's a great player, but it's a super outrageous contract for me. Tremaine Edmonds, the Chicago Bears, 4 years, $72 million. That's a linebacker, folks. Not just a linebacker. That's not a rush linebacker. That's a middle linebacker making $72 million. That's a big chunk of change.
What gets me about that is that you have the same team that just traded away Roshan Smith and because they didn't want to pay him. And then they come back in and sign
Hmm.
Tremaine Williams for what's more. I mean, granted,
Right.
okay, he's 25. He's a young player. He's great. But Roquan Smith is also a great player, and he was on their roster, willing to sign a deal, and they didn't want him. So that's odd to me.
That's interesting. So what do you think of the quarterback situation for the Jets? Are they going to end up getting their guy, or are they going to is it or are they just going to be kind of mindlessly in the wilderness this offseason?
Well, it's the Jets, so all money should be on that they're gonna end up screwing this up somehow and ending up quarterbackless and then trying desperately to get,
And we're
someone and
talking about
signing a
Aaron Rodgers, by the way,
person. Yeah, uh, but it
who's
also looks
also
like
demanded that they sign like 3 or 4 of his receiving targets, and they've actually gone out and signed the first one.
Alan Lazard,
Yeah,
and so it
and
looks
there's a
like
few to go, including
yep,
Odell Beckham Jr. too.
the, um the Jets seem willing to do what they need to do to get Rodgers, and honestly, that defense is good. The offense, the whole team is young and talented and hungry, but they had nothing at quarterback last year. I mean, they just got nothing out of the position, and now you got a chance to get a guy that has played really well despite having not a lot around him and all of that. I mean, he didn't win it last year, but the 2 previous years he was MVP. And um, yeah, he's 39. I get that, but he doesn't look like he's slowing down quite yet. And so if they can get him, then they become a contender instantly because the rest of that team is good. Uh, the problem
And
that
well
they were going to
coached.
yeah, the problem that they're going to run into is that if they go through and do a bunch of this stuff, and then he changes his mind and is like, "Yeah, never mind, I'm going back to Green Bay." Now they're stuck. They don't have a quarterback, and they just signed a bunch of guys they probably don't want, if they can't get their quarterback.
No.
And what do they do?
And Nathaniel Hackett at offensive coordinator is still left wondering
Yeah.
what the heck is wrong with him, because he
Mhm.
might be might be the factor in 2 teams. Okay, so I want to get back to the Seahawks a little bit. It seems like the way that we've kind of projected the offseason so far has kind of come true.
Mhm.
We talked about Geno Smith coming back. We talked about them possibly moving on from Shelby Harris and Gabe Jackson, some of the cap casualty type stuff, Quentin Jefferson to generate a little bit more cap. All of those
Mhm.
things have happened. And I just kind of want to see if you think that we need to do more. Uchenna Nwasu, do we need to restructure that? Do we need to restructure Al Woods or potentially cut Al Woods or Brian Monet to generate more ability to go even further in free agency? Or do you think that we've done most of the work now, even though free agency doesn't not technically start until tomorrow, and we have now shift our focus towards the draft?
Well, I think they're mostly going to shift their focus towards the draft. The Seahawks typically sit out the first chunk of free agency and wait it out and then pick up some guys along the way that are, um, a little cheaper and that kind of stuff. But um, if you start looking down the list, they need a center. They absolutely need a center, and I can't
And
imagine them.
linebackers.
Absolutely true. That's true as well. I just can't imagine them
And
going
running back.
into this next year without having, or going into the draft even without having added another center. And I don't know who that would be. I'm not looking at this list being like, oh, that's the guy they should go target. Um, but they're going to get someone. Um, Austin Blythe isn't that guy. He
Connor
just,
McGovern's still out there, and Coleman Shelton. I mean, those are the two guys ish.
yeah,
Couple of, I mean, there's a few others, but those are starter kind of level guys, potentially.
yeah. I mean, it's there. Tyler Larson, um, Ben Jones. I mean, there's guys, but did any of them excite you?
No, no, that
um,
would be a hedge. I mean, there are 2 or 3, possibly 4 centers in the first, I'm going to say 3 rounds that I
mhm,
think Seattle would have their eye on that fit their scheme really well. And so I think that they can come out of the draft. Now, if you don't end up having a good starter heading into the draft, though, you tend to reach because you don't want to miss. And,
mhm.
you don't want to miss on Michael Schmidt, so you draft him at 20. Well, you could have had him at 37, but you didn't want to take that chance. Weipler at 87, but maybe he goes at 84, and you're going, oh, then there's nobody else. Now I'm screwed. So you really kind of don't let the draft come to you as well as you could if you don't solve that early.
Yeah, and that's why I think we're going to see like a center come in, and maybe it's someone who people think of as a guard, but they have like center qualities to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's true.
didn't Connor McGovern? I know you mentioned him a second ago.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't he sign with the Bills?
There's 2
Um,
Connor McGoverns.
is that what I'm looking at? I was looking at the
Mm-hmm.
wrong one.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't be the first time. Um, Yeah, so you've got that, but maybe a guy like Aaron Brewer, who he's a restricted guy, but we'll see what they tendered him at. That hasn't been released yet. But maybe he's a guy that you can um, go sign and come in. He's a guy that has some of those center qualities in terms of his feet and his ability to get to the second level and that kind of stuff. So, um, yeah, I mean, I know they're going to do something there. And we've already mentioned linebacker.
God,
They
they
got to do
cannot
something.
not do anything at linebacker. We literally do not have any linebackers.
Mhm.
You know, it's just it's not going to be good. I mean, we've got a situation where Jordan Brooks, I mean, they're talking like everything was successful, and his timing is such that he could come back in training camp or be ready for the first game. Likely not, though. And you certainly don't want to put all your eggs in that basket. And then after that, Cody Barton has left already. He talked about Nick Bellure. I kid you not, Nick Bellure is literally our number 1 linebacker right now on the roster.
Yeah, he's the number one
Um,
linebacker. It's him and John Radigan are the only 2 inside linebackers listed on the roster. And so you kind of okay, you can kind of look through some guys and see, oh, Levante David's there. That would be great. Except for you're not
mhm.
signing. If you're going to sign him and pay what he needs, go get go bring Bobby Wagner back, right? But there's some other guys out there. Maybe David Long
Drew
is a
Tranquil,
possibility. Jalen Smith, Drew Tranquil, Anthony Barr.
Rashawn
Uh,
Evans.
so there's some guys. Quan Alexander is another one.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, none of these guys are like move the needle. Like, ooh, there's a Pro Bowler, but they're guys that could replace Cody Barton. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see them go do that. Like those are the 2 positions, center and inside linebacker, that I expect them still to go get maybe another wide receiver. But again, you've got 2 starters at wide receiver. You're looking for
or a running back.
bargain,
Yeah.
yeah, bargain third, fourth wide receiver types. And you're not spending a whole lot on that. Maybe Paris Campbell. through Tranquil. Maybe I don't know. There's just
Right.
these are right. We're
The
not
list is
talking
not
big
exciting.
name
That's
guys.
why I think Bobby Wagner comes back for like a $10 million deal. But we'll see what happens there. I mean,
Mhm.
but that would be the best case scenario for Seattle. You get Bobby Wagner back, then Jordan Brooks comes back. You can ease him in. John Radigan, obviously, you have a guy that you get in the draft that's mostly pro ready, that can come in right away. Just like Jordan Brooks played right away when he came in, Bobby Wagner
Mhm.
played right away when he was drafted. You can do that at the linebacker spot if you choose correctly. So I don't think it's a panic situation, obviously, but it will be addressed, I believe, and it
Yeah,
always is. By the time we get to the
we'll
draft,
get
darn
somebody.
near everything is addressed already. Usually with John Schneider, and I feel comfortable that we'll get there. So how does this change, or does this change for you at all, the top of the draft, what we've done at the defensive line? Now, we talked about drafting defense first. If we
Mhm.
didn't get a franchise guy that at quarterback that was there, we've signed Geno Smith. The urgency isn't quite what it was. Um, what about Jalen Carter and Will Anderson, Keith?
Well, I mean, if Will Anderson's there, you take him. Jalen Carter, it comes down to his legal stuff and what you think about that, and how you feel about the fact that he left the scene when someone had died. This isn't like a victimless crime here. And like what happens and how all of that goes. So we'll see kind of how that shakes out in the next, 5 weeks before the draft. But um, I have a hard time thinking that Will Anderson's going to be there unless Arizona trades out
Yes.
and of that spot, and then 4 quarterbacks go in
Yep.
the first 4 picks. Will
And
Anderson
Las
looks.
Vegas, made a move in signing Garoppolo, so their
Mhm.
urgency to move up into that third spot to
Yeah. So
trade with the Cardinals is not so urgent.
yeah, the only team thinking that may move up now would be Atlanta, and we'll see what they do, or whether they choose to sit and wait and see if that happens. They may move up with Seattle to get a guy if they want a guy like Anthony Richardson, and Seattle's like, no, we're not taking him that early. That's too much risk for us. They may let the Falcons come up and take him and get a bunch of picks for it. I could see that happening as well. I really think that what we've seen so far in the last week between the Bears trading out of the first spot and then Seattle getting its defensive line kind of figured out is Seattle moving down.
Yes,
It's feeling more and more like Seattle's going to move down,
they do
get
need a
some
trade
extra
partner to
picks.
do that. You
Yep.
mentioned one, but there's not many.
There's not a lot. And so the Falcons are probably the best one, but then if you look at other way, it might be um, it's all about who are they going who's going to trade with them and who are they coming up to get, because you've got a guy like our team like New Orleans at 10, and Chicago is at 9, but they moved down. They're not going to move back up and give up anything for it. So you're really kind of looking at, okay, maybe Vegas wants to jump in front of the Rams to get a
I mean,
defensive lineman, or
potentially Detroit, right behind us at 6. Potentially the Tennessee Titans,
mhm,
currently at pick number 11. That's about as far as you would want to move back if you were Seattle. But you could get probably a second and a third round pick, and potentially a 2024 fourth round pick to make that move. That could be enticing for Seattle, knowing that you're going to have equal value on the board there, at a number of different positions. You're going to miss out on those premier guys on the defensive line, but if you've already addressed that in free agency where you're comfortable, maybe you drop back and you grab a corner or a premier wide receiver in this draft, or the first offensive guard off the board, or what have you.
yeah. And when you've got 2 first round picks, you have an opportunity to be like, okay, well, we can move back to 8 or 9 and not feel like we have, and not feel like that pressure to get a stud at 5 and take that risk. Because if you move back, you get a guy who's really, really good, but maybe not like a blue chip prospect, but then you get another player at 20. And over the
Yes.
course of those two players, you still know you're making a massive impact and you're getting another player either next year or down the road. So overall, it ends up being a kind of a good situation to sit in. It kind of comes down to what we see at quarterback and what happens between now and the draft in terms of Jalen Carter's situation. And, if Indy signs a quarterback, then maybe, okay, now you're looking at Seattle maybe getting back in the quarterback game type of situation. I mean, you've got some guys out there that, might show some interest and we'll see what happens. But right now it kind of looks like, if Seattle can move back, I think they'll take it.
Yeah, interesting conversations over the next several weeks. Absolutely, for sure. I want to mention something right off the bat here before we head out is that Dan Viennes was scheduled to come in and be a guest on the show. He had to back out last minute for some scheduling stuff, and he will return at a future time. So I apologize for those wishing to have him and his insights on the show. Just wasn't made to happen today. Anything else before we head out? Of course, we've probably missed a couple of signings. I've been trying to check, but it's bound to happen.
No, I mean, there's been so much that's happened in this last 3 days, not even last week. It's we can't talk about all that. At some point, you and I need to have a show where we just looked at the rest of the NFC West, because what the Rams have had to do because of their cap situation is absolutely crazy.
Yeah,
And yeah, I want to get your opinion on how bad you think they might be after having to gut
it's
that
gonna be
entire
bad.
roster.
No, it's gonna be bad. They're cellar dwellers for sure. And Arizona, of course, is gonna rebuild completely. It wouldn't surprise me if Kyler Murray was secretly on the trade block. I know that they're unhappy with him. They're unhappy with his maturity level in that organization. Players have actually come out and said that.
Mm-hmm.
Current rostered players. And so it's not good there either. Seattle's well positioned, I believe, not only currently the way they're managing their roster and building it and having a bridge wherever they're going to go in the next 3 or 4 years. Uh, uh, the drill and the way that the cap is structured, I think they're in an outstanding position to recapture the NFC West. You take a look at the 49er roster. Yes, it's a great roster. Everybody knows that, but the quarterback position is kind of messed up right now. So who knows what's going to
The
happen there?
problem with
And so I think it's going to
Kyler
be a real
Murray,
battle here going the next couple of
yeah,
years.
the problem with Kyler Murray is that his cap number is only 16 million for next year, and if they cut or trade him, they will lose $43 million in cap
Yeah.
space. He will have he will be a $60 million in dead money, and it's only a $16 million current cap hit. That's how bad it is. He's not going anywhere.
And he's injured and he's probably not going to be able to play until November. So it's
Yep.
just it's not a great deal for the Cardinals or the Rams.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be all Seattle, all 49ers here for the next 3 or 4 years, and the rivalry will be reborn, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. I like the way that Seattle's building the roster. I think they're doing it the right way. You mentioned that earlier in the show, and I think that they have a competent roster with the 49ers as well. Great coach, and may the best team win. I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's going to be fascinating. And
Yeah.
I think the NFC eventually runs through this division again.
Yeah, I mean, you've got two teams in this division that look really strong. They're both playoff teams last year. Um, the 49ers have to figure out quarterback, but the rest of that roster looks really good. And Seattle is early in a rebuild and already made the playoffs and looks like they're just going to be significantly better next year. So it's going to be a fun division with those two teams. There's also going to be It looks like 4 free wins for each of them, which will help whichever team wins the division also, get some home field advantage against the rest of the division. So, um, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, fun stuff. All right, let's get out of here for today. We're going to be back on early next week and finish out our prospect look in the draft. We just came out with a new show this morning with safeties. Our last show is looking at the cornerback group in this draft, and then we'll go from there. And in our run up to the NFL draft, which is just going to be fantastic. It's a good time to be a Seahawks fan for sure.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at WC Hawk is at Hawks. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform, virtually every single one of them. Just look up Seahawks Playbook podcast. When you get there, make sure you hit that subscribe button. YouTube as well. Need subscribers there. And share it if you could. That would be great. So until next time.